is the way. This is the way.
This week we get a pretty self-contained story from the Bad Batch, so let's dive into Season 2, Episode 9, titled The Crossing. Before we get into it, if you're a fan of our videos, please like our content and subscribe to the channel. It really does help us out and gives us the opportunity to create more content for you. Okay, let's get into it. First off, one of the best elements of this episode has got to be the music. It opens up with this solo guitar that swells into a nice arrangement that felt very reminiscent of the theme in Last of Us. So the score this season from the Bad Batch is being composed by Kevin Kiner, who is returning from the first season. Hats off for this very incredible composition that dives into this episode. So our Bad Batch team visits an unknown planet, and yes, I checked. There's no name for this planet yet, but the visuals are stunning from the opening. While I can see why a few fans might not enjoy this episode for the pace and the relevance to the overall narrative of the story, I have to give this episode credit for its beautiful shots and a very personal story. This episode is all about how we deal with loss and how we move on, and we follow this through the lens of Omega as she is struggling to adjust to Echo leaving the Bad Batch. While the other members of the Bad Batch try to explain in their own way that they have to soldier on, throughout the episode Omega is distraught over the changes. So we find out in this episode that Sid buys a mine and our Bad Batch are tasked with mining a highly volatile called Ipsium. Now at first I thought for sure that this was going to be a link to Kyber crystals, since the name Ipsium kind of reminded me of Ilum, which is a planet that the Jedi take their younglings to mine for Kyber crystals so that they can make their lightsabers. Part of me felt like this was going to be Omega's journey to find her own Kyber crystal, but that didn't end up being the case. Instead, we got a very personal story about how we deal with loss. I did very much enjoy that Omega played an active role and was extremely useful in the mission to mine Ipsium. I also really enjoyed the drilling mechanism and how it worked to capture this mineral substance. So we find out that someone on this unknown planet is watching the Bad Batch and steals the Marauder, thereby stranding our team on the planet. Each of the Bad Batch members takes this in stride and have probably experienced similar setbacks throughout the Clone Wars, but losing another element to her world is hard on Omega. It's just another constant that's been taken away from her. Tech mentioned that there's a spaceport nearby, so the Bad Batch begin to make their trek there. I love that during this time we get a stampede in this episode, and it reminded me of the Lion King. I'm very glad though that Wrecker didn't go the way of Mufasa though. So Hunter's special ability is a heightened sense, which allows him to track his targets better than any technology can, and he can sense electromagnetic frequencies, which help him find locations of interest anywhere on a planet. So we kind of get a sense of this power throughout the episode as Hunter reads the terrain and can sense the storm and its movements. We find that one particular bad storm hits them and they have to seek refuge in another mine, and the storm ends up destroying the Ipsium that they brought with them, and it explodes and traps them in the mine. Being trapped without a ship and down a member of the crew amps up Omega's concerns, and while Tech tries to coldly explain that they have to adapt to their situation and that they'll find a way, Omega goes off in the mine to be alone because she's basically had enough at this point. Omega ends up finding a huge deposit of purified Ipsium, and since she knows it'll help them get out, she decides to try to extract some of this Ipsium. Tech then comes along to talk to her because of the insistence of Hunter and Wrecker, and while Tech assists Omega with gathering more Ipsium, Omega falls down the cave and Tech immediately jumps down after her, and they both get taken down a river in the cave where they find a possible exit. They contact Hunter and Wrecker to come down and bring the Ipsium they mined, and while they wait, we get a very personal moment between Tech and Omega, which I absolutely love. At this point, Tech tries to explain once again in his very logical way that soldiers have to adapt. But Omega brings up the point that they're not just a squad of soldiers, but they're also a family. Tech agrees with her, and Omega asks him why he doesn't act like they are. This gives Tech pause, and he explains that Echo and Crosshair made different decisions than they did, and while they are difficult to understand, they have to respect them. Then Tech admits that even though he may think differently than others, he still feels the same as Omega. I really enjoyed this element, and it showcases something we don't often see in television, in that people process things in different ways. And while they might not show their feelings the same way as others, oftentimes we might be feeling the same way internally. This helped Omega understand and connect with Tech a little bit more, and it also helped her deal with the loss she is feeling, knowing that in some way, Tech was feeling the same way. The crew are able to blast their way out of the cave and get to the spaceport that they find is abandoned, but they find a long-range dish to contact Sid, who begrudgingly tells them to give her a couple of days to come help them out. With low rations and a hospitable planet, Hunter replies to Sid that they don't have a couple of days. But Sid's hollow feed cuts out and she doesn't get to reply. Omega then tells our crew that they will find a way, which signals that she's learned to overcome the losses and focus on hope and the family she still has. Overall, I really did enjoy this episode for all the little nuances of it and the detail put into this episode. While it might seem like a slowdown from the amazing story we got last week, it played an important role in exploring the mindset of our characters and had a very powerful message. So for my rating, I'm going to give this a solid 8 out of 10. I look forward to seeing where this story takes us next week, and I'm still very much enjoying this season of Bad Batch. So thanks for joining me today on Fatherly Fandom, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And from our families to yours, have a good one, and may the Force be with you.